safeguarding our young people. South Africa's Olympic and Paralympic athletes are protected by protocols and not just words to assist in preventing abuse. This requires Team SA's coaches and managers to be cleared against the child protection and sexual offences registers. A local company says their app does just that, and also allows athletes to anonymously report harassment or bullying. Team SA uses the Guardian app, and its founder spent 17 years as an investigator for the South African Police Service's Child Protection Unit. He says it's not enough to just have safety policies at work or school and then being ill-prepared when incidents happen. Marc Hardwick speaks to us live from Durban now for us to better understand the Guardian app. Marc, thank you so much for your time. Let's start with how the app works and what kind of services it provides. Marc, I think your microphone might be on mute. It's a common thing in these meetings. We forgive you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Is it better? Is it clear?
You look like you're on a roll, so go ahead.
Okay, so essentially what it is it gives a platform to any person, whether it be an athlete, whether they be traveling overseas, like obviously the Olympic team have been, or whether they're in an environment within a club environment or at a school. But what it does is it gives them the ability to report anonymously on challenges that they may be facing, and also challenges that may be being faced by friends of theirs or colleagues. So if I come to a friend of mine and I say, listen, this and this and this has happened, or I feel uncomfortable about this, it may be about abuse, it may be about bullying, it may be about drugs, it may be about sexual harassment. And so essentially what it does is it creates a place whereby we can allow them to report anonymously, but additionally, it allows the person who receives the information to open up dialogue and communication with that athlete and never know their identity. And so it allows the person to send through additional evidence that might be able to be used. That could be in the form of a picture, it could be in the form of a video, it could be in the form of a document. It really does create a situation where the information can get through to the powers that be, and we can then use that information to better safeguard athletes when they are facing these challenges.
And it's not just for athletes. It's in any case where we need to safeguard children, from what I understand. From your work in the South African Police Service, what is it that made you decide this app was necessary?
So I think we find ourselves in a situation where all too often much abuse in South Africa goes unreported. You know, certainly when we look at the previous story you just had as an example, you know, we sit in a situation where there is almost the disclosure that the girls don't want to make about what has happened. And sexual assault is very different from any other crime because the disclosure that needs to come from the victim, they essentially need to go through the crime again, and it's very, very difficult. And so we see that this app brings a lot of solution in schools. It brings a lot of solution obviously in the sports space. You know, we've got clients that are using it in church environments. Really any place where we may have somebody who may be experienced as a result of somebody who has power over them, like a teacher or a coach or, you know, somebody like that, may take advantage of that relationship. And as a result, they can't disclose what is happening in the relationship, because when they do, it may affect things like their academic progress. It may affect things like their sporting progress. And so they sit with this secret. And all too often, we have adults disclosing only when they are adults about things that happened when they were children. What we're seeing that this solution does is it gives them the voice to speak out now. And what that does is it prevents, obviously, the perpetrator from potentially hurting other people now. So if I was sexually assaulted when I was 12, I'm not waiting till I'm 27. Yeah. And in that time, the perpetrator is still hurting other people. We're able to get in there now. We're able to, you know, arrest the person now. We're able to assist the child now to, you know, God willing, create a functional adult one day, or as functional as somebody who goes through that kind of trauma, you know, and that's where we want to be. We want to be able to address the problem now. We want to be able to remove the perpetrator now.
Mark, what happens after they've reported the abuse, the bullying, or whatever complaint on your app? Where does that information go? And then how do you make the process that follows easier for these victims? Because often, like you say, they have to relive the horror of what they've suffered. They have to go through a criminal trial, for example, which is horrific for victims. So how do you take that process further and make it easier for victims?
So I don't think that this app brings that solution. I think the secondary trauma around sexual assault, whether we're talking about adults or children, it's obviously far greater with children because of the lack of emotional intelligence. But I think the secondary trauma that comes from being a victim of sexual assault is a very real thing. And I think that secondary abuse happens in, even in first world countries. But for me, one of the biggest hurdles that we need to overcome is the ability for that child to disclose as soon as possible. So what this app does, it doesn't necessarily reduce the secondary trauma, which is definitely something that we do look at, and it is something that we need to address. However, this app gives them the ability to report anonymously on the challenge that they're facing, because all too often we see in a situation where the child does make a disclosure, they almost find themselves, when they're vulnerable, wanting to make the report. If I can explain it like this, a child that is a victim or a survivor of sexual assault, where the perpetrator is 90% of the time going to be somebody who has a strong relationship with the child. And very often the child actually doesn't have a problem with the relationship. Very often the child still loves the perpetrator, if it's dad or uncle or big brother. What they have a problem with is the sexual assault. And so that's very confusing for the child, because I love and care for the person, but I hate what they're doing to me. And generally the strength to disclose happens at the time when they're feeling vulnerable. And that vulnerability isn't happening when they are at school. It isn't happening when they're with their friends. The vulnerability is happening when they're at home, when they're stuck with the perpetrator in the change room. And it's during that time, when they're feeling vulnerable, that they will make the report. But from a child protection perspective, we now have the report. And even tomorrow, when they don't want to report it, we still have the information, and we can use that information to safeguard going forward.
Mark, thank you so much for that. And I understand exactly what you mean. You're lowering the threshold for them to be able to report these crimes. And thank you for the work you're doing. Marc Hardwick, founder and MD of The Guardian. Up next.